Ma'am, I wouldn't get in that truck if I were you. Claire Whitmore turned toward the voice, then back toward the faded blue Ford F-150 idling beneath the hard Missouri rain. Water streamed from her hair onto the collar of a charcoal business suit that had cost more than some people made in a month, though right now it offered about as much protection as tissue paper. Her rental car sat 20 yards behind her with its hazard lights blinking uselessly. Her phone showed 3% battery. The nearest rideshare driver had canceled 6 minutes ago, and standing beside the old pickup was a man she had never seen before, holding an umbrella patched with silver tape. "You need a ride or not?" he asked. Claire studied him. Late 30s, work jacket, mud on his boots, tired eyes that somehow didn't look impatient. Before she could answer, a small face appeared behind the passenger window. "My dad isn't scary," a little girl announced. She considered this carefully, then added, "His truck is." Claire laughed before she could stop herself. The man closed his eyes for half a second. "Thank you, Sophie. I'm helping." Clearly, rain hammered the roof of the gas station canopy, filling the silence between them. Claire had spent 12 years learning how to read people before they entered a boardroom, but there was nothing polished to read here. No rehearsed smile, no recognition, no sudden change in posture when he looked at her expensive watch. Just a stranger getting wet while holding an umbrella over someone who hadn't even said yes. "How far are you going?" Claire asked. "About 40 miles east." Her eyes lifted. "Seriously? Unless the highway moved since breakfast." Sophie pressed both hands against the glass. "He makes jokes when he's tired." The man opened the passenger door. "Ethan Cole." Claire hesitated only a moment. "Claire, no last name." Ethan didn't ask for one. That surprised her more than it should have. She climbed inside, and the cab smelled faintly of coffee, sawdust, and the cinnamon gum Sophie was chewing in the back seat. The upholstery was cracked near the console. A child's purple backpack rested beside a toolbox. Nothing about the truck belonged in Claire's world of black sedans, private elevators, and conference rooms 40 stories above the street. Yet as Ethan pulled carefully onto the highway, she felt strangely relieved. "I can pay you for the ride," she said. "No need. At least let me cover gas." "Still no need. You always pick up strangers in storms." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Only the ones standing beside dead rental cars looking like they're about to fire the weather. Sophie giggled. Claire looked through the rain-streaked windshield and smiled despite herself. For the first time that week, nobody wanted her signature, her approval, or her money. Ethan Cole didn't even know who she was. And 40 minutes from now, when Claire learned exactly where this struggling single father was headed, that simple kindness would become the most uncomfortable truth she had faced in years. The rain followed them east, drumming steadily against the roof while the old Ford moved through gray afternoon traffic at an unhurried pace. Claire glanced at the dashboard clock, then at her phone. 2%. She slipped it into her purse without checking the messages waiting for her. "You can charge it," Ethan said, nodding toward a cable near the cup holder. "It is probably the wrong kind." Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. "Dad has Everkind. He fixes things." Ethan gave his daughter a sideways look. "I repair houses, sophomore. I'm not an electronics store." "You fixed Mrs. Keller's toaster." "That was one toaster." Claire smiled and connected her phone. "So, you're a contractor?" "When there is work." Ethan adjusted the windshield wipers as a passing truck sent a curtain of water across the glass. "Carpentry, drywall, electrical repairs when the job is simple enough. Whatever keeps the lights on." There was no embarrassment in his voice. "No apology. Just fact." Claire knew executives who spent 20 minutes describing achievements nobody had asked about. Ethan described his life in 12 words and returned his attention to the road. Sophie reached into her purple backpack and pulled out a paper bag. "Are we eating now? We have another half hour." "That sounds like yes." She opened the bag and produced 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Ethan sighed. "Those were supposed to be lunch." "It is after lunch. You have become very technical lately." Sophie handed 1 sandwich forward. Ethan broke it in half, passed the larger piece back to her, then looked toward Claire. "Hungry?" "I am fine." Her stomach answered before her pride could. Sophie giggled. Claire closed her eyes. Apparently, I'm not fine. Ethan divided his half again and offered her a piece. Take it. You barely have enough. Then we barely have enough together. The words were simple, almost careless, but Claire stared at the sandwich for a second before accepting it. Turkey, cheddar, mustard. Nothing remarkable. Yet she could not remember the last time someone had shared something with her without calculating what might come back. Thank you, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. That was all. No favor created. No debt recorded. Outside, wet fields stretched beneath a low silver sky, and telephone poles disappeared one by one into the rain. What do you do, Claire? Sophie asked. Claire swallowed. I work in business. What kind? Real estate development. Sophie considered this. Do you build houses? Sometimes. Offices, stores, neighborhoods. So you fix things too. Claire almost corrected her, then stopped. Sometimes I hope so. Sophie tilted her head. Are you important? Sophie. Ethan said gently. What? I'm just asking. Claire looked at the little girl in the rearview mirror. It depends who you ask. Sophie nodded, as if that were perfectly reasonable. My dad is important. Ethan grew quiet. Claire looked toward him. His hands rested steadily on the wheel, rough and calloused, a pale line of sawdust still caught near one cuff. I believe you, Claire said. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Then he looked back at the highway. Claire had entered the truck, believing she was accepting help from a stranger. Somewhere between the broken phone charger, the shared sandwich, and a child's uncomplicated definition of importance, she began to wonder whether she had misunderstood which person in that truck possessed the richer life. The highway narrowed as they left the busier stretch of town behind, and the rain softened from a hard pounding to a patient rhythm against the windshield. Ethan turned the wipers down one setting. Sophie had gone quiet in the back seat, drawing something on a sheet of paper balanced across her purple backpack. Claire watched the landscape pass beyond the window, wet soybean fields, low wooden fences, a white church steeple appearing through the mist and disappearing again. Her phone had climbed to 9%. Enough power to see 17 missed calls from her chief operating officer and 6 messages marked urgent. She turned the screen face down. Someone really wants you, Ethan said. Work. Bad day. Complicated day. Those usually pay overtime. Claire smiled faintly. Not where I work. Ethan nodded, as though he understood more than she had said. He did not ask another question. That restraint was becoming strangely unsettling. Most people who learned even a fragment about Claire wanted the rest. Her company, her title, her connections. Ethan seemed perfectly comfortable leaving unopened doors closed. How much farther? She asked. About 18 miles. Claire looked through the windshield. Where are you headed exactly? Ethan adjusted his hands on the wheel. St. Matthew's. Claire turned toward him. St. Matthew's Community Center? Yeah. Her expression changed so quickly that even Sophie noticed. Claire, the girl asked. Are you okay? Yes. Claire sat straighter. I just did not expect that. Ethan glanced at her. You know the place? A second passed. Then another. Rain whispered over the roof. Claire could hear the soft rattle of the heater fan and the faint scratch of Sophie's pencil behind her. I know of it, she said carefully. Ethan gave a small nod. Then you probably know it has seen better days. Claire did know. She knew the acreage. She knew the zoning classification. She knew the projected commercial value after redevelopment. She knew the number printed beside the property on a confidential acquisition report sitting inside her leather briefcase. What she did not know was why Ethan Cole was driving there with his daughter on a rainy Thursday afternoon. What takes you there? She asked. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Meeting. About what? Trying to keep the place standing. Claire felt something cold settle beneath her ribs. Is it closing? Not if some of us can help it. His tone remained calm, but the quiet had changed. There was weight behind it now. A development company wants the property. Offices, retail space, expensive apartments. The usual promise that everything will be better once the people already there cannot afford to stay. Claire looked down at her hands. Whitmore Development Group. Her company. Her project. Her approval. Maybe the company has reasons, she said softly. Ethan nodded. I'm sure they do. You do not sound angry. Anger does not keep a community center open. Sophie stopped drawing. Ethan continued. That place runs an after-school program. Free tutoring. Meals for seniors twice a week. People around here use it because they need it, not because it looks good in a brochure. Claire swallowed. And you're going to speak at the meeting? Probably not much. Why not? Ethan looked ahead through the rain. People with money usually arrive with presentations. People without it arrive with stories. Guess which one gets called evidence? Claire had spent years believing numbers removed emotion from difficult decisions. Sitting beside him, she suddenly wondered whether numbers sometimes removed people instead. What company is buying it? She asked, although she already knew. Ethan gave a tired half-smile. Whitmore Development. Claire went completely still. Sophie looked from Claire to her father, sensing something neither of them understood yet. Ethan kept driving, unaware that the woman sitting 3 feet from him had personally authorized the project he was traveling 18 miles through the rain to oppose. And for the first time in years, Claire Whitmore was afraid of reaching her destination. For the next several miles, Claire said almost nothing. The old Ford moved through the rain while Ethan drove with the same steady patience he had shown from the moment he found her beside the disabled rental car. Sophie returned to her drawing, unaware. That 3 simple words had changed the air inside the truck. Whitmore Development. Claire had heard her company name spoken thousands of times in boardrooms, interviews, investor calls, and charity dinners. It had always sounded like achievement. Now, from Ethan, it sounded like consequence. How long have you been involved with St. Matthew's? She finally asked. A while. That sounds deliberately vague. Ethan smiled slightly. About 7 years. 7. Sophie was 2 when we started going regularly. Claire glanced toward the back seat. Sophie was carefully coloring a small yellow house beneath an enormous blue sky. What made you start? Ethan's expression softened, but his eyes remained on the highway. My wife, Rachel. Claire waited. Ethan did not continue immediately. The tires whispered over wet pavement. A road sign passed through the gray afternoon. St. Matthew's, 14 miles. Rachel volunteered there, Ethan said. Art classes mostly. She believed kids needed somewhere they could make a mess without somebody telling them they were doing life wrong. Sophie looked up. Mom painted the big tree. Ethan nodded. She did. Claire turned slightly. The mural in the east hallway? Ethan looked at her. You have been inside? Claire felt the question land harder than it should have. Once. Briefly. It was technically true. She had toured the property 6 months earlier with architects and attorneys. She remembered measurements, parking access, structural reports. She did not remember the mural. Rachel passed away 5 years ago. Ethan continued quietly. Claire lowered her voice. I am sorry. Thank you. No dramatic pause followed. No request for sympathy. Ethan simply kept driving. After she died, things got rough for a while. I was taking every job I could get, sometimes 12-hour days. St. Matthew's kept Sophie after school when I could not get there on time. Mrs. Alvarez sent dinner home with us more times than she will admit. Mr. Bennett helped Sophie with reading. Nobody asked what I could pay. Sophie spoke from behind them. Because we were family. Ethan's jaw tightened for just a moment. Yeah, kiddo. We were. Claire looked. Outside, rainwater traced crooked paths down the passenger window. In her office, St. Matthew's existed as Parcel 17 on a redevelopment map. 11.8 acres. Aging structure. High maintenance costs. Strong commercial potential. She had never seen the words Rachel, Sophie, Mrs. Alvarez, or family anywhere in the report. So that is why you are fighting the sale, Claire said. Ethan shook his head. Not the sale. The idea behind it. What idea? That something is worthless because it does not make enough money. Claire went still. Ethan continued without accusation. Buildings change. Neighborhoods change. I understand that. But if you erase every place where ordinary people can belong without buying something first, eventually you do not have a community. You have customers. Claire stared at him. He still did not know. He was not performing for a chief executive officer. He was not making a speech for influence. He was simply telling a stranger what he believed. What if Whitmore offered enough money to replace it? She asked. Replace what? The building. Ethan glanced toward her. I can rebuild walls, Claire. His voice was gentle. I cannot rebuild 7 years of people showing up for each other. Silence settled over the cab. Sophie held up her drawing. I finished it. Claire turned. Beneath the yellow house stood 3 figures holding hands. Who are they? Claire asked. Sophie pointed carefully. Me, Dad, Mom. Then she pointed toward a small green tree beside them. That is the tree she painted at St. Matthew's. Claire looked at the drawing, then at the leather briefcase near her feet containing the final redevelopment documents. For the first time, the papers inside felt heavier than the entire building they were meant to replace. The first thing Ethan noticed when the Ford turned into St. Matthew's parking lot was the row of polished black vehicles near the entrance. The second was the group of people waiting beneath the awning, all wearing dark coats and impatient expressions. Claire noticed them too. Her hand tightened around the strap of her purse. Looks like somebody important showed up, Ethan said. Claire did not answer. Sophie leaned between the seats. Maybe they are here for the meeting. Probably, Ethan said. He parked beneath an old maple tree near the far end of the lot, where rainwater had gathered in shallow puddles across cracked asphalt. The community center stood ahead of them, red brick darkened by rain, white trim faded with age, warm yellow light glowing through tall windows. Claire stared at it differently now, not as 11.8 acres, not as a redevelopment opportunity, as a place where someone had painted a tree because children deserve somewhere to make a mess. Ethan switched off the engine. The sudden quiet felt enormous. Well, he said, this is us. Claire remained still. She could tell him now. She should tell him now. Ethan, there is something I need to explain. A knock sounded against her window. Claire closed her eyes. Outside stood a tall man in a navy overcoat, holding an umbrella. His expression carried equal parts relief and panic. Ethan looked from the man to Claire. She lowered the window. Ms. Whitmore, the man said quickly. Thank goodness. We have been calling you for nearly an hour. Mr. Harlan and the legal team are already inside. We delayed the presentation as long as we could. Nothing moved inside the truck. Sophie stopped unbuckling her seatbelt. Ethan's eyes shifted toward Claire with a stillness more painful than anger. The man outside continued, unaware. We have the final redevelopment package ready for your approval, Ms. Whitmore. Claire swallowed. Thank you, Daniel. Give me a minute. Of course. He stepped away. Rain filled the silence he left behind. Ethan looked down at the leather briefcase near Claire's feet. For the first time, he noticed the small silver letters pressed into its corner. Whitmore Development Group. Whitmore, he said. Claire nodded. Yes. Claire Whitmore. Yes. Sophie looked between them. You own the company? Claire answered softly. I run it. Ethan leaned back against his seat. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her. Somehow, that made the moment harder. You knew, he said. Not when I got into your truck. But you knew after I told you where we were going. Yes. And you let me keep talking. Claire looked directly at him. I wanted to understand. Ethan's face changed slightly. You could have asked. Would you have spoken the same way if you knew who I was? He considered the question. Probably not. Claire nodded, almost grateful for the honesty. That is why I stayed quiet. Ethan opened his door. Cold rain swept briefly into the cab. He stepped out, then walked around and opened Sophie's door beneath the umbrella. Claire followed, carrying her briefcase. Near the entrance, Daniel and 2 executives waited for her. On the opposite side of the doorway stood local parents, retirees, volunteers, and teachers. 2 worlds under one roof. Ethan took Sophie's hand. Ethan, Claire said. He stopped. For what it is worth, I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. He looked at her for a long moment. There was disappointment in his eyes, but no cruelty. If I had known who you were at the gas station, I still would have given you the ride. Claire's breath caught. Ethan glanced toward the executives waiting for her, then toward the families waiting inside. I guess now we find out what you would have done if you knew who we were. He walked away with Sophie beside him. Claire remained beneath the awning as rain whispered against the pavement. Daniel approached and held out the redevelopment folder. Everything is ready for your signature. Claire looked through the glass doors and saw Ethan helping an elderly woman hang her wet coat. Behind him, covering nearly the entire east hallway, was a painted tree with wide green branches reaching toward the ceiling. Rachel's tree. Claire had walked past it 6 months earlier without ever truly seeing it. She took the folder from Daniel, but for the first time in her career, the signature everyone wanted from her felt less like power and more like a question. The folding chairs inside St. Matthew's filled quickly, their metal legs scraping against the old hardwood floor while rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Claire took her seat at the long table near the front beside Daniel and 3 members of Whitmore Development's legal team. Across the room, Ethan sat beside Sophie among teachers, parents, retirees, and volunteers. Only 20 feet separated them, but Claire had never felt a distance so clearly. Daniel opened the presentation. The proposed redevelopment will create approximately 200 permanent jobs, improve property tax revenue, and introduce new retail and residential opportunities to the district. A projector hummed behind him. Clean architectural renderings appeared on the wall. Glass storefronts, landscaped sidewalks, modern apartments. Everything looked beautiful because nothing in the pictures had a history. The existing structure, Daniel continued, has significant maintenance liabilities and does not represent the highest economic use of the property. Claire heard Ethan shift quietly in his chair. He said nothing. An older woman stood first. My name is Elena Alvarez. I have volunteered here for 18 years. Her hands trembled slightly around a folded sheet of paper. We serve dinner to about 60 seniors every Tuesday and Thursday. Some come because money is tight. Some come because they have nobody waiting at home. Daniel nodded professionally. We understand the center provides valuable services. Mrs. Alvarez looked at him. Then why does your plan remove them? Silence. A young mother spoke next. She worked overnight shifts at a nursing home. St. Matthew's after-school program allowed her to sleep 4 hours before picking up her children. Then Mr. Bennett described the tutoring program. Another volunteer explained the winter coat drive. No one used the language of investment returns. They spoke in names, meals, hours, rides, birthdays, second chances. Claire looked down at the redevelopment folder. Every spreadsheet inside suddenly seemed incomplete. Sophie sat beside Ethan, drawing quietly. Behind them stretched Rachel's mural, the broad green tree Claire had failed to notice during her first inspection. Daniel finished answering another question and turned toward Ethan. Mr. Cole, I understand you requested time to address the company. Ethan shook his head. I did not request anything. Claire leaned toward the microphone. Mr. Cole, do you have something you would like us to hear? Ethan looked at her. You heard plenty in the truck. Several people glanced between them. Daniel frowned, confused. Claire remained still. I would like everyone else to hear it too. Ethan stood slowly. He did not carry notes. I'm not good at speeches, he said. I fix doors that do not close, roofs that leak, lights that stop working, problems you can usually see. He looked around the room. This place has problems. The furnace is old. The windows need replacing. Half the plumbing probably remembers the Reagan administration. A few quiet laughs moved through the chairs. Then Ethan's voice softened. But broken is not the same as worthless. Claire felt those words settle over the room. Ethan glanced toward Sophie. 5 years ago, after my wife died, I was working every hour somebody would pay me for. I thought being strong meant handling everything alone. People here taught me otherwise. He looked toward Mrs. Alvarez. They fed my daughter. Toward Mr. Bennett. They helped her read. Then toward Rachel's painted tree. They remember my wife when I could barely say her name. Daniel shifted beside Claire. Ethan finally looked directly at her. You asked me in the truck why this matters. That is why. Claire's fingers rested against the unsigned folder. What would you ask Whitmore Development to do? Ethan paused. Look, at what? At us. His voice remained quiet. Not the acreage. Not the projected revenue. Not what this land could become. Look at what it already is. Nobody moved. Even the projector seemed suddenly too loud. Claire remembered Ethan splitting his sandwich when he barely had enough. She remembered Sophie saying her father was important. She remembered sitting 3 feet from a man who had no idea she possessed the power to change this room. Ethan returned to his chair. Daniel leaned toward Claire and whispered, "We should continue with the vote." Claire looked at the signature line waiting beneath her name. Then she looked across the aisle at Ethan. He was not asking her to rescue him. That was what unsettled her most. He was asking her to see him. And somewhere between the polished presentation and the old painted tree, Claire Whitmore finally understood that the most dangerous kind of blindness was believing a thing had no value simply because nobody had assigned it a price. Daniel's hand remained near the presentation remote, but Claire did not give him permission to continue. Around them, the room waited beneath the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the steady rain beyond the windows. "Ms. Whitmore," Daniel said quietly, "the board expects authorization tonight." Claire closed the folder. "Then the board can hear my answer tonight." His expression tightened. "You understand what delaying this project means." "I'm not delaying it." Daniel stared at her. "Claire." She stood. "I'm stopping it." The room went completely still. One attorney leaned forward. "The acquisition agreement has already passed preliminary approval. Our investors have committed capital based on this development. Then we will revise the plan. That could cost millions." Claire looked at the architectural rendering still glowing against the wall. "So could building the wrong thing." Daniel lowered his voice. "This is not how decisions of this size are made." Claire glanced across the aisle. Ethan had not moved. He was watching her without triumph, without expectation. "Maybe that is the problem," she said. 20 minutes later, Claire stood in the narrow hallway outside the meeting room with her phone pressed to her ear. Sophie's drawings were taped along one wall. Rachel's painted branches stretched above them. On the call, 3 Whitmore board members spoke in clipped, impatient voices. "You are risking the River County portfolio. We have investors waiting. Your position is not untouchable, Claire." She listened to all 3. Then she answered, "I know." A pause followed. "If you reverse this acquisition because of one emotional community meeting, the board may call an emergency vote." Claire looked through the doorway at Mrs. Alvarez stacking coffee cups while Ethan folded chairs. "Then call it." She ended the call. For several seconds, she stood beneath Rachel's mural and let the silence settle around her. Ethan approached carrying 2 folded chairs. "That sounded expensive." Claire gave a tired smile. "You heard. These walls are old." He placed the chairs against the wall. "So, is the insulation?" Claire looked at him. "The board may remove me." Ethan's expression changed. "Because of this?" "Because chief executive officers are supposed to protect returns. And people, that is apparently more complicated." Ethan rested one hand on the back of a chair. "You do not owe me anything, Claire." "I know. I mean it. Do not save this place because I gave you a ride." Claire met his eyes. "I am not." "Then why?" She looked toward the meeting room, where Sophie was helping Mrs. Alvarez gather paper cups. "Because this morning I knew the square footage of this building, its assessed value, its repair costs, and the projected revenue if we replaced it." She paused. "I did not know Sophie learned to read here. I did not know seniors ate dinner here. I did not know Rachel painted that tree." Ethan said nothing. Claire's voice softened. "I had information. I did not have the truth." Rain whispered against the windows. Ethan studied her for a long moment. "So what happens now?" "Whitmore keeps the commercial project, but we redesign around St. Matthews. The center stays. We fund structural repairs through the community partnership budget, and ownership remains local." Ethan blinked. "That is not going to make your board happy." "No, your investors?" "Definitely not." "And you are still doing it?" Claire nodded. "Yes." Ethan looked toward Rachel's mural, then back at her. "Why?" Claire smiled faintly. "Because broken is not the same as worthless." For the first time that evening, Ethan smiled too. Not because he had won. Not because Claire had lost. Because she had listened. Daniel appeared at the end of the hallway, holding the unsigned redevelopment agreement. "Ms. Whitmore, the board is waiting for final confirmation." Claire took the folder, removed the authorization page, and handed it back and signed. "Tell them St. Matthews stays." Daniel hesitated. "And if they demand your resignation?" Claire looked through the doorway at the people who had spent years showing up for one another without asking what it would return. Her answer came quietly. Then they will finally know what my signature is worth. 3 months later, St. Matthew's smelled like fresh paint, sawdust, and coffee brewed too strong in the kitchen downstairs. The old building had not become glamorous. Claire had insisted on that. The hardwood floors still carried scratches from decades of folding chairs. Rachel's painted tree still stretched across the east hallway. The difference was quieter. New windows kept out the cold. The furnace no longer rattled like loose change in a coffee can. The roof had stopped leaking above the tutoring room. And on a bright Saturday morning, Ethan stood outside, replacing a section of weathered fence, while Sophie painted small wooden signs for the community garden. "Dad, yours is crooked." Ethan stepped back and studied the board he had just fastened. "It is not crooked." Sophie narrowed her eyes. "Mom would say it is artistic." Ethan laughed. "Your mother used that word whenever something could not be fixed." A black sedan rolled slowly into the parking lot. Ethan noticed it, then returned to his drill. He had seen plenty of Whitmore vehicles during the renovation. Claire had kept her promise. More importantly, she had survived the emergency board vote by a narrow margin after presenting a revised plan that preserved the center while moving the commercial development to the adjoining property. She had not called Ethan afterward to celebrate. He respected that. The decision had never belonged to him alone. A car door closed. Sophie looked up first. "Claire." Ethan turned. Claire crossed the parking lot, carrying 2 cardboard drink trays and a paper bag. No assistant followed her. No umbrella waited over her head. She wore jeans, a navy sweater, and white sneakers that immediately found the one muddy patch beside the curb. She stopped and looked down. "That feels appropriate." Sophie ran toward her. "You came. I said I would." Claire lifted the bag. "And I brought cinnamon rolls." Sophie looked toward Ethan. "She can stay." "Glad we cleared that up," Ethan said. Claire handed him a coffee. "Black. No sugar." He looked at the cup, then at her. "You remembered. Chief executive officers occasionally retain useful information." "I thought. You mostly remembered square footage." Claire smiled. "I have expanded my skill set." For a moment, neither spoke. Children laughed near the garden beds. A hammer tapped somewhere inside the building. Wind moved gently through the maple branches overhead. Claire looked toward Rachel's mural through the open doorway. "The restoration team finished sealing the painting yesterday. Sophie told me. I wanted you to know we did not touch the original brushwork." Ethan nodded. "Thank you." Claire studied him. "You still do that?" "Do what?" "Say 2 words when 20 would be easier. 20 words cost extra." She laughed, and Ethan realized how different the sound was from the careful laugh he had heard in his truck during the storm. This one carried no boardroom restraint. Sophie appeared between them, holding a green paintbrush. "Claire, are you busy?" Claire looked at her. "Not today." "Good. We need another person." "For what?" Sophie pointed toward 3 unfinished garden signs. "Dad writes ugly letters." Ethan folded his arms. "I'm standing right here." Claire accepted the paintbrush. "Then clearly this is an emergency." An hour later, green paint marked Claire's fingertips, and Sophie had convinced her to draw flowers around every sign. Ethan watched from the fence, quietly amused. He had expected Claire to save the building and return to her world. Instead, she had returned without photographers, without speeches, without asking anyone to notice. That mattered to him. Late that afternoon, Sophie carried the supplies inside while Claire walked toward the black sedan. She stopped beside it, looked at the waiting driver, then across the parking lot at Ethan's faded blue Ford. "Actually," she said to the driver, "you can head back without me." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Claire walked past the sedan and opened the passenger door of his truck. "Need a ride?" he asked. She settled into the cracked seat and smiled. "I was hoping you would ask." From the back seat, Sophie sighed dramatically. "Finally." Ethan looked at his daughter. "Finally what?" Sophie buckled her seatbelt. "Nothing." Claire tried not to laugh. Ethan started the engine, and, as the old Ford pulled away from St. Matthew's, nobody inside it needed to know yet where the road was leading. For once, it was enough that Claire had chosen the passenger seat. By early fall, Claire no longer needed an excuse to visit St. Matthew's. Some Saturdays, she helped Mrs. Alvarez serve lunch. Other days, she sat at a folding table beside Sophie and discovered that a 9-year-old could turn a simple art project into a 3-hour commitment. Ethan never rushed what was happening between them. Neither did Claire. They had both lived long enough to understand that second chances were not promises made in dramatic moments. They were choices repeated quietly until trust had somewhere safe to grow. Claire still ran Whitmore Development. Ethan still arrived at job sites before sunrise with coffee in a dented thermos. Her office remained 40 stories above the city. His work boots still left sawdust on the floor of his truck. Their lives had not magically become identical. They had simply stopped believing different men impossible. One October evening, St. Matthew's held its annual community dinner beneath strings of warm lights in the renovated hall. Mrs. Alvarez cooked enough food for twice the neighborhood. Mr. Bennett played old records near the kitchen. Sophie proudly displayed a new painting beside Rachel's preserved mural. It showed the same broad green tree, but this time there were 3 figures beneath it. Ethan noticed first. Sophomore, she looked innocent. What? Who is that? He pointed toward the 3rd figure. Sophie glanced at Claire across the room. You know who? Ethan lowered his voice. Did you ask her before painting her into the family? Sophie considered this seriously. No, Sophia. But she keeps coming back. Ethan had no answer for that. Later, after the last chairs were folded and the coffee pots were empty, the 3 of them stepped outside. The evening air was cool and smelled faintly of wet leaves. Claire's sedan was nowhere in sight. She had stopped bringing it weeks ago. Ethan unlocked the Ford. Sophie climbed into the back seat, wrapped herself in an old blanket, and announced that she was not tired. For minutes later, she was asleep. Claire smiled as Ethan pulled onto the quiet county road. She had a big day. She has every day big. I noticed. They drove beneath trees turning gold and red, headlights sweeping across wooden fences and dark fields. The truck still rattled slightly above 55 miles per hour. The passenger seat was still cracked. Claire had once suggested replacing it. Ethan had told her the crack had character. She had learned not to argue with a carpenter about character. At the next intersection, Ethan slowed. Where are you headed? Claire turned toward him. It was such an ordinary question that neither of them spoke for a moment. Months earlier, the answer had frightened her. A destination had exposed everything she had hidden and placed her across a room from the man who had shown her kindness without knowing her name. Now Sophie slept peacefully behind them. St. Matthew's still stood, and Claire understood something no quarterly report had ever taught her. Home was not always the place your calendar told you to reach. Sometimes it was where you were finally known without needing to perform. Wherever you two are going, she said. Ethan looked at her, then towards Sophie in the mirror. A quiet smile appeared. Funny. What? Same destination again. Claire reached across the console and rested her hand over his. Ethan turned his palm upward and held it gently. No grand promise followed. No expensive gift. No perfect ending pretending grief had disappeared or life would never become difficult again. There was only an old Ford moving beneath an amber evening sky, a sleeping child in the back seat, and 2 people who had learned that dignity could cross every distance money created. The first time they traveled the same road, it had been an accident. This time it was a choice. And perhaps that was what Grace had been trying to teach them all along. Sometimes the miracle is not that life gives you a different road. Sometimes it simply places the right person beside you and gives 2 lonely hearts the courage to choose the same way home.